Well, the fight against the federal government's laws against supposed misinformation has heated up today, with a group of coalition frontbenchers banding together to combat against any threat to freedom of speech as a bloc. That was followed this afternoon by the intervention of Meta, which is Mark Zuckerberg's company that owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp and the new Twitter rival Threads, which believes any move to give the Australian Communication and Media Authority the power to police what people would post online would chill free and legitimate political expression. Now, what the government is proposing here is tricky. ACMA wouldn't have the express authority to call up Facebook or Twitter or whoever else and tell them to take down certain posts or else, but it would give ACMA the power to force the social media industry to create a quote-unquote code of practice relating to what it believes is misinformation. If a company breached this code of practice, it could face fines of up to $2.75 million or 2% of its global turnover, whichever is higher. And ACMA would also be empowered to create its own industry standard, breaches of which could result in fines of up to $6.8 million or 5% of global turnover. So while ACMA can't specifically say to a social media company, well, we don't like that post, please take it down, it can wave the big stick and threaten serious punishment for allowing users to post things it doesn't like. ACMA wouldn't be in the front seat driving the car per se, but they would definitely be in the back seat telling us how to drive. The question, of course, is who within ACMA gets to wave this big stick and decide what is and isn't misinformation, particularly when it comes to subjective opinions. So David Littleproud, Dan Tehan and Barnaby Joyce, Bridget McKenzie, they've all formed a bloc against this quote-unquote misinformation legislation, taking up the fight before the opposition has formally chosen a position. Senator McKenzie and Nationals MP Keith Pitt have described the draft legislation as straight out of 1984 and said it repudiated standards of free speech. The fact this group have had to form their own advocacy outfit, as it were, is a real shame. Public consultation on this legislation opened on June 25. It only runs until August 6, which is less than a month away. Now, of course, governments don't tend to take much notice of public consultation. They just go out and do it to go through the motions and give the impression that they're listening to the average punter. But by not yet having a formal position, the opposition is missing an opportunity to create a groundswell of opposition early in the piece. As former Nationals leader Barnaby Joyce said in The Australian today, they might say to not support global warming is misleading and illegal when it's just a different view. What's morally at odds through your eyes is not morally at odds through my eyes. Who's going to be the grand arbiter of where virtue and malice lies? The answer, of course, is a government body. And this shouldn't be something that the opposition has to think long and hard about. It is an open threat and affront to free speech. There are no grey areas in the defence of free speech. You either believe in it or you don't. Without free speech, you have no other rights because you have no way to defend them. Once your speech can be censored, so can your ability to defend yourself and your rights. Freedom of speech is fundamentally about the government or any of its tentacles interfering with your right to express yourself. Private companies, of course, within their rights to dictate what is or isn't said on their platforms. They own them. Newspapers, for instance, won't publish letters to the editor that are clearly outlandish or wrong, and fair enough. But it's not the job of the government to tell a newspaper what letters it can publish, and nor is it the job of the government to tell a social media platform who or what it allows on its website. Meta's head of public policy in Australia, Josh Mashin, raised this point in a select committee hearing today.
But of course, the draft legislation goes further than just enforcing this particular code. It also empowers the ACMA to, for example, develop binding standards around misinformation and disinformation with some very substantial civil penalties and also criminal penalties for individuals who are involved. And that is the part of the legislation that we're looking at quite closely. We can see some potential for that for that power to be abused, or for it to be used in a way that inadvertently chills free and legitimate political expression online.
Now, Mashin there has hit the nub of the issue. Giving a government body the power to dictate what is or isn't appropriate to post on social media is entirely a power that can be abused. Again, who actually gets to decide which opinions are misinformation? At the moment, that comes down to the individual social media platforms, and we know that their judgment is already questionable. Back in January, Facebook took down a number of ads paid for by conservative lobby group Advance Australia, which said the voice to Parliament would, quote, cement identity politics in the Constitution, grant special rights to Indigenous people and divide us by race. RMIT Fact Lab deemed the claim that the voice would confer special rights to be false, writing that, quote, legal and constitutional experts say the proposed voice to Parliament will not provide anyone with special rights, but rather provide an opportunity to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to make representations to Parliament on matters that impact them. On the basis of that, Meta deemed Advance Australia's ads to be quote-unquote misinformation and removed them. But who are RMIT University and Facebook to say that it's false that a voice to Parliament would provide special rights? I mean, it would be a constitutionally enshrined body that gives one race and one race alone the ability to make special representations and provide advice to the Parliament and executive government. Given there's no proposal for a voice to Parliament for Indians or Asians or any other mob, then surely special rights is a legitimate argument. Similarly, Facebook made value judgments about whether or not information posted about the origins of COVID counted as misinformation. A lot of what people like Sharri Markson were raising 3 years ago, that COVID could have leaked from a lab in Wuhan, was rubbished as misinformation. But we now know it was, in fact, highly likely. Senator James Patterson asked Meta Australia's Regional Director of Policy, Mia Garlick, about that today.
With respect to the information that was deemed either harmful and removed or labelled as misinformation during the pandemic, they were extraordinary circumstances and we were operating with the best information that we were being advised on at the time.
But do you recognise it was a mistake in that instance?
Well, I think these were sort of fast evolving times and there were lots of people who were providing us with advice around what types of misinformation would constitute harm, and where under our global policies, if we're advised that by experts that particular pieces of misinformation could either cause real world harm or imminent physical danger, then we were working to remove those. And, information changed and sort of intelligence and knowledge changed. We then made updates to those to change what content we were actioning.
I guess that just highlights the challenge, though. Even very eminent independent experts can be wrong. And doesn't that lead you to the conclusion that less censorship rather than more is the safest option, given that even experts can be wrong in hindsight?
I think the way that we've tried to approach it is to set up sort of independent accountability systems and transparency systems so that people have confidence that we are not the sole decision maker here.
The social media companies have to make these calls, and we know they can get it horribly wrong. The consequences of that are already bad enough when it comes to the flow of information and its effect on public opinion and elections. Is that really a power we want to give to, extend to, a government body? Even if ACMA is at arm's length from the government, it is, like any other government outfit, run by people who are appointed by the government. It is in a government's interest to appoint like-minded people who will enforce the rules in a way that would help them. Remember when Prime Minister Julia Gillard tried to introduce a media czar in 2013 that would have overseen the Press Council, which is an industry-established body to oversee editorial standards? Again, it would have been a government outfit that essentially dictated to media, in this case print media, what standards they should or shouldn't uphold. Now, why do you think a government would want to exert power over the media. The real question in all of this, of course, is what actually is misinformation? And why is the federal government so intent on controlling what can be posted to social media or not?
Every bit of disinformation and misinformation and scare campaigns.
Misinformation.
Misinformation.
Misinformation. The misinformation which is there. Some misinformation. Spread misinformation.
Distractions and misinformation.
Misinformation.
All of the misinformation.